Hi and welcome to my YouTube. My name is Lisa. I go by YV Edit on here as well as on TikTok. You may have seen my videos before, but if you are new here, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. There was a lot of people on my mega analysis yesterday saying that they clicked into the video even though they had never seen the show because they wanted to watch the analysis, and you guys are so sweet. Thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't seen the show, the premise of Love is Blind is basically exactly what it sounds like. They put a bunch of people in these pods. It's basically like a cubicle sized setup. Women on one side, men on the other side, and they basically do it in like a certain area every year, and people from that area apply to be on the show. And what they basically do is spend, I think, like 10 days communicating exclusively in these pods with people as they try to narrow down their choices to just one person. And when they feel like they've made their choice, the men get to propose. I don't know if that's like strictly in the rules that the man has to propose, but I don't think we've ever seen a woman propose on the show. So I don't know. That's how it always goes. A man will propose and then the woman will say yes or no. And if she says yes, then they will get to see each other like the next day. They get to meet in real life. And then they're split up again until everybody that has a chance of being paired up and is revealed to each other. At which point they all go on this like kind of group honeymoon for a couple days as they basically get to know each other. They have a couple group hangouts so people all get to see each other. Then they spend like 2 more weeks just living together and like trying to figure out if they're compatible or not. At the end of that 3 weeks, if they haven't broken up by then, they get to actually have the wedding. And then at the altar, they give their final answer. Sometimes both people say yes, sometimes one person says no, and it's like this whole big deal. Yeah, it's been going for 7 seasons and has obviously been the subject of a lot of commentary. A lot of moments on the show have gone viral in the past, and so that's why I'm choosing to cover it on my channel, because I believe that there's real life, like practical lessons and applications that we can take from this show. Especially younger women that are looking to date men can learn a lot from this show about things like body language, about things like words versus actions, love bombing, things like gaslighting. Whether it's, scripted, edited, whatever, these people are still human beings. Like, they're not really given a script. They may be nudged in one direction or another, but the point is that there's no script. The point is to see what comes out when people are put in these types of crazy, high pressure situations. I think we can learn a lot about human behavior from observing human behavior, right? And today we're going to talk about a couple that actually did not end up making it to the altar, but we got to see their very emotional breakup scene at the very beginning of the weddings episode. And today we're gonna do a full breakdown of this breakup, because I think there's a lot of important lessons in here for young women, especially as more and more men get comfortable presenting like this and get really comfortable in their fake feminism and get really comfortable with this whole wolf in sheep's clothing act. This is Marissa. This is how we met her in the pods. And this is Ramses, who love bombed her and proposed to her in the pods. The last time I tried to upload videos from the show to my YouTube, they weren't very happy with me for copyright reasons. Basically, they were talking for a while in the pods, and then he sort of found out she was still talking to another guy. And they had a very calm discussion about that. She made up her mind that it was going to be him. There was really no love triangle drama. But you could tell that this man got really nervous as soon as he sort of found out that she may be seeing somebody else. So the next time that they were in the pods, he like wrote her this whole love letter. He said things like, "This is the love I desire," and like, "I want to tuck you safely in between the spaces of my heartbeat. I want to spend the rest of my life with you," etc., etc. Now, of course, for a show like this, love bombing is essentially the entire premise. If I'm going to give somebody dating or marriage advice, it is don't listen to their words, it's watch their actions. And for days or weeks or whatever in the pod, she was only hearing this man's words. Lots and lots of words. He had lots of beautiful words to say. He was very much love bombing her. He was basically insinuating that they have like a soulmate type connection and like that she's the only thing that he wants in the world, all this kind of stuff. So unsurprisingly, he probably also physically love bombed her as soon as they got around each other in person. Mind you, this man has been married before. And I'm not saying that's necessarily like a huge red flag. I don't think any good marriage has ever ended in divorce. A divorce could definitely be a beige flag. Mind you though, he also did comment on how it was really like religious deconstruction that led to their divorce. So that's where kind of like a little bit of a red flag came up for me. A lot of men step into the religious space in order to be like validated and uplifted by other men. And part of that is having a smoking hot wife, right? Like this guy definitely gives me like wannabe youth pastor or wannabe pastor vibes. Probably his entire goal with like religion and stuff like that. Also, part of that entire mindset is that a wife should be basically a submissive appliance that never says no to bedroom stuff, never argues with you, you know, she just prays for you, she lets God work it out, and she suffers silently. We'll come back to his ex-wife later because Marissa talks about her in an interview, so we're gonna bookmark that. But that's kind of their backstory. Now, Marissa has never been married, is currently in law school taking classes, and also has a job. This Love is Blind season was based out of DC. We find out later that her school and stuff is like an hour and a half out from DC. And so she's got a lot on her, whereas this man dropped out of college halfway through, which again, there's really no shame in that. A lot of men are really drawn to like strong, powerful, like ambitious women until they get in the same room with them, and then they all of a sudden feel small and inadequate and not good enough. We'll come back to that later as well. All I'm suggesting is that it could have played into this dynamic in a way that neither of them were expecting. Once it came down to, you know, let's try to make this thing work in real life. And the reason I say that is because sort of ever since the Cabo trip, which they were totally fine the whole time there, and again, that's not surprising, right? There's a reason why couples go on vacation. It is really important to be able to get away from like your daily life and your work and stuff like that and just be able to enjoy each other. But in my mind, like grown people, especially grown men, should also understand that when you come home from vacation, things go back to normal, right? Like you're no longer being served drinks in a jacuzzi or eating like shrimp cocktails on the beach. You're back to your normal life. And again, he was very well informed of what she's doing, what she's going to be doing for a living, etc. And yet, despite everything seeming like 100% between them in the pods, on the honeymoon, as soon as they get back to DC and start trying to live their life together, this man starts to subtly nag her. In this scene, which is again like one of the first things that we see of them trying to live their lives together, he all of a sudden brings up his moral conflicts about the military, which is relevant because Marissa was in the army and that's how she's paying for her school. And the reason that I say he was subtly nagging her is because a lot of people didn't catch this as a red flag. A lot of people were sort of giving him props for being so liberal and so forward thinking. They're like, well, obviously, you know, he's from Venezuela, so he doesn't like the army, which is all good and fair. But he very much knew about her involvement in the army in the pods. There's a moment where he asks her, like, so have you been in like into more army guys or, you know, whatever. He tries to suss out like what her type is, and she says yes. So obviously this was no surprise to him. It's funny to me that he sort of back-pocketed that criticism and then did it out of the pods. So he didn't talk about it in the pods. He didn't talk about it on the honeymoon. He just, you know, sort of dropped this on her in one of their very first conversations when they got back home. Honestly, just like steadily downhill from here. You can see him sort of like slowly checking out little by little. I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the whole physical intimacy issue, which brings me back to his involvement with religion, right? I just think there's something there. A lot of men think that getting married within the church or like getting married to a Christian woman is going to guarantee them free access to physical intimacy no matter what. And I feel like the reason for his like religious deconstruction was probably something like that. Seeing how important it becomes to him later on, I think that was probably one of the biggest reasons why he started deconstructing and like backing away from this relationship with his ex-wife. I think he did it in a very similar way where he sort of like backed his way out of the room, just like he's about to with Marissa. That's why this is a very dangerous kind of man. Because everything happens so subtly. Because this kind of man is usually a coward. They're not going to say this stuff, straight up to your face. Because they want to be seen as a good guy. That's why they put on these cloaks, right, of religion or of progressive, liberal, feminist man, right? So religion was supposed to be the magic cloak that provided him respect, admiration, sex, a submissive and humble, joyfully available wife, etc., right? And when it didn't, he sort of dismantled that whole thing and like backed out. And we're going to see the same exact thing here. So this is a second attempt. So he puts on a different cloak. He puts on the feminist, liberal, good guy cloak, grows out his rat tails, whatever. And again, it doesn't work. It doesn't earn him all of this like respect and unlimited physical intimacy. He's like, but I put on the cloak, but I deserve this. But you're supposed to feel safe with me. You're supposed to let me do whatever I want. Meanwhile, out the other side of his mouth, reassuring her that he's going to be there for her, that her autoimmune condition is not a problem at all, that he is totally this cool, progressive, like feminist dude. Fast forward to their next conversation. They're discussing children, and so birth control naturally comes up, and Marissa says, hey, we can't just keep sort of like playing the baby roulette, so to speak, having unprotected relations. We need to figure this out. She says, I'm okay with just rolling the dice and like having a kid if that happens, because I'm ready to have kids in the next couple of years. He, at his ripe age of like 30 whatever years old, is like, I would wait like 5 to 7 years or whatever. And she's like, well, I'm not going to be 40 having a child. They sort of negotiate, and she's like, okay, well, if you are set against having kids in the next couple of years, then I guess I'm going to have to figure something out with birth control. And he immediately says, well, I wouldn't want you to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And she says, oh, good. I was hoping you would say that so we can use condoms then, right? And he just hasn't been the same since. So I really want young women to make no mistake about why this breakup really happened. That was the final nail in the coffin of this relationship. Because he's just like not interested. He's like, yeah, well, but that doesn't feel good. And I'm going to need it to feel good. And he basically draws that line. And I don't really know what they did after that as far as birth control. But yeah, he kind of put his foot down on that one. Again, the next time we see them, they are having some sort of a tense moment again. She asks him, like, what's wrong? And he is like, I just don't know if I can do this. The physical intimacy thing is so important to me. And I just don't know how that's going to play out in the future. And she's like, I've literally been sick. I'm having a flare-up. I'm still driving to class and going to work every single day. And the only thing that I asked you to do was to sort of back off of me physically because I'm not in the fucking mood. And that's the problem. I was radicalized very early on by a not very well known, highly underrated Beyonce song. The song is called Yes. And in the chorus, Beyonce says, I said yes to your number and yes to you dating me. Yes, we can be together, but you gotta wait for me. The first time I said no, it's like I never said yes. I said, yes, we can be together. Yes, you can stay with me. But when I say no, not tonight, you're acting so ungratefully. The first time I said no, it's like I never said yes. I heard this song when I was like 14 and I have not been the same since. Honestly, like that mindset saved me from a lot of boy trouble. I'm not gonna lie to you, because she really exposed all of them in this one song. And this is exactly what happened to Marissa and Ramses. The first time she said no, it was like she never, ever, ever said yes before. Make no mistake that this is exactly what happened. This is exactly what soured this relationship for Ramses. Make no mistake that a man will literally watch you suffering in sickness, having a flare-up, driving back and forth an hour and a half from your school and back, and somehow she still has a job. And he will look you dead in the eyes and be like, I don't know if this is going to work for me. I don't even know if he has a job. Says he's a program coordinator, which probably means it's like a work from home, 32 hours. He's maybe getting paid $30 an hour. So this, let's just be nice and say unaccomplished compared to her, man is gonna look at her, busting her ass day and night, working really hard to be successful, and the only takeaway from that is you're not having sex with me enough. Mind you, this is the same man who had the nerve to say, I'm looking for a partner that practices empathy. The same man that when his partner is sick, having premenstrual symptoms, having a rheumatoid arthritis flare-up, in school full-time, has a job, hour-and-a-half commute, doesn't have sex with him once, and he's like, what about our future? Is it always going to be like this? Absolutely diabolical behavior. And I'm going to tell you why he does that. Because he's jealous. Because this is supposed to be him. But he doesn't have the willpower or the wherewithal. And he's attracted to her because of that. But he also hates her because of that. Him putting on all of these cloaks, that he's trying on, it's not like automatically just like giving him the benefits that he believes that it should be giving him. Like things should just fall in my lap. They're just not, because he's not genuine. He's not authentic, and people can tell. And he just keeps dropping these things on her like bomb after bomb after bomb. Just don't know if this is gonna work out for me. And she's just like, I don't know what to tell you. Like some days I'm just not gonna want to be touched because I'm really overstimulated. She was talking about how she's in her premenstrual week as well. And as a fellow sufferer of PMDD, I can tell you that's definitely like a very overstimulating feeling, because you don't feel like yourself. You feel like you're in the wrong skin. You feel like your brain is not even your brain. Like everything is just like effed up in your mind. It's a good time to just be given some space. It's a good time to give your significant other a little bit of a break, especially since he's over here throwing a little temper tantrum of his own. He's like, you're not giving me enough attention. And she's like, I'm literally buckling under the weight of trying to carry everything that I'm doing and also trying to please you at the same time. Can you give me a break? And he's like, I don't know, maybe. So by the time we get to this scene, I think we already all kind of know what's happening. We all know what to expect, but we haven't been, love bombed and reassured and gaslit this whole time like Marissa. So I think, in my opinion, the most painful part of watching this breakup scene was realizing that like she really didn't know. Like she really thought that they were gonna try to stay and work it out. She really had no idea, because he was so good at like reassuring her, like even despite the fact that he had doubts. The problem is that that's not reassurance. That's the man's insurance. It's the insurance. For him, it's plausible deniability that he didn't break up with her over the sex thing, because he does a really good job of like deflecting her attempts to make sense of the entire situation. She asks him in the previous scene where they're talking about intimacy, she's like, well, what about childbirth? Like, what about all this stuff? Like, have you thought about it? And he's like, no, I haven't actually. And we get him sort of like admitting to the fact that he didn't think this stuff all the way through, because every other time he's just like trying to reassure her that it's going to be okay no matter what, and he's not really saying what the problem is. And throughout this entire scene, all she's doing is just trying to get some answers, because this whole time he has deflected any responsibility on his part, that he didn't think this all the way through, that this was too soon for him, that he said stuff that he didn't mean, that he's still not over his ex-wife. Things like that. All of this just starts sort of popping out. And the other reason why this is so difficult to watch is because she has to basically spell it all out for herself, because he is unwilling to. He's just dragging his feet. He's just mashing his words. He will not give her a straight answer whatsoever. She is left to sort of like figure out and pick up the pieces all on her own, because he's unwilling to outright hurt her and say, I effed up. I went into this too quickly. I'm not over my ex-wife. I'm threatened by you, or I don't like you as much as I thought I would, or I guess I really didn't mean it when I said that I'm okay with your autoimmune disorder. We didn't talk about how that's going to mean less bedroom activities for me. Because he has put on this cloak, right? He can't take it off now and just reveal himself as a wolf. He has to keep up the appearances. And part of that is making her break up essentially with herself, and then leading her on like months after that, because he's just not willing to say the quiet part out loud. This was a very, very painful watch because of the way that he conducted himself and because of the way that he just refused to give her a straight answer. Okay, let's get into the interview. This was a Glamour magazine interview. Now, in the title, they put this phrase, "He made me sound crazy." And I was intrigued by that because this is another thing that these like feminist, wolves in sheep clothing men absolutely love to do. Right? They love to turn it around on you and make it like it was your fault the whole time. And that's exactly what they're going to tell their friends and family and everybody else. They're going to make you sound crazy. After months of crazy making behavior, they're going to make you sound crazy. Honestly, this combination, right, of love bombing, gaslighting, crazy making, that is a cocktail that's enough to send absolutely anybody over the edge. I actually think she kept herself really well composed. I feel like her grief was very obvious, but it wasn't misplaced. Like, she really was grieving the rest of her life, the rest of her future. She was grieving the rest of her, like, eternity, as this man made it sound like. That's how long he wanted to be with her. That was, you know, the lengths that he was willing to go for her. And it was all a lie. And she had to, like, accept that with a bunch of cameras in her house. Like, I couldn't imagine. I think a lot of us would be in the exact same position after all of that, which is why you have to get out before it gets that bad. At the first red flag, first time that he shamed her about her career, it should have been over. And she herself kind of admits this. So when she's recalling that specific red flag, looking back a year later, where I'm in a different headspace, I was trying to make a lot of concessions, Marissa admits. I wanted to be with him and I wanted it to work so bad that I was willing to be like, okay, you're making me feel bad about my career, but we can get past that. And now I'm like, dude, no. And yeah, she's absolutely right. But of course, it's not going to seem like such a big deal in comparison to, you know, the worlds, the universes that he was promising her. Companionship and being soulmates and unconditional love and all that. You know, of course, she's just going to be like, oh, he's not making me feel bad about my career. He's just trying to be honest about where he's at. She's going to make these, you know, concessions because she's been love bombed and it feels like she would lose something like really important. But the thing is, he has not taken any action. He has only spoken with his words. His actions throughout the show consist of existing. We never hear about this man like going to work. We never hear about him picking up around the house, what kind of life he has outside of this whole situation, because he's just existing and expecting her to like do this whole dance. He's expecting her to literally revolve around him. He just gets to exist. And whenever she takes any of that energy that he was attracted to in the beginning and puts it towards herself, he doesn't like that. He doesn't understand that, yes, when you are on vacation with one other person, right, in a hotel room, whatever, you're obviously not going to work, your room gets serviced every day, food is paid for, the drinks are paid for, obviously then in that moment, this woman can put all of her energy towards you. This is sort of the dichotomy that a lot of men have with women, period, right? They're like, I love it when you shower me with your attention. But as soon as you're like, okay, I'm back home, I gotta get back on my grind, you know, I gotta get back into school and work and studying and taking exams and planning a wedding, all that, they're like, wait, what happened? They act brand new, right? It's like trying to teach a toddler about the concept of work. Like, they're like, well, what do you mean you don't have time for my pee-pee? All of a sudden, they hate your energy and they hate your success and they hate that you're so driven because it means that they're losing out on something. It means that's one more thing that they can't have from you. They can't take from you every single day. It's incredibly discouraging watching men act like this. This is most of them. And so especially if you are a woman that's got your own, you're successful, you have a job, you're going to school, whatever, please watch out for these jokers. They're going to love bomb you to the moon and back with their words, with their letters, with their physical affection, right? These are the guys that will be like good in bed or whatever, but they expect you to be in bed with them all the time. They expect that you are a loser doing the bare minimum just like them and that you have that kind of time and energy. When you don't, you'd have to be a loser like them, in which case they wouldn't be attracted to you. It's such a catch-22, ladies, and I don't know how to save you from it. All I can tell you is that a lot of men are going to feel this way, and you have to learn to spot them right away. Right at that first neg, you're out the door. Because otherwise you're dragging it out. Okay, so this is her addressing that conversation that they had in the kitchen where she's wearing that blue robe. She says, Ramses and I obviously were a very physical couple. And not just in a sexual manner, but also affection and touching. That week we just had a lot going on. The night before that morning, I believe, we didn't have any intercourse at all. And I believe we didn't even like sleep cuddled up like we usually do. And so it felt a little weird. Now, that's another thing I want you to catch is that apparently up until this day, they were having intercourse multiple times a day, every day. The first time she said no, it was like she never said yes. We didn't even sleep cuddled up like we usually do. And so it felt a little weird. It seems like he was trying to send her a message. It was like, this is not gonna fly. So when we woke up, I just said, hey, what's going on? I could tell you're having anxiety about some stuff. Now, again, she's putting words in her mouth. He's not having anxiety about some stuff. He's throwing a little tantrum. He's throwing a little fit. And she said, because he's very obvious, I can read him pretty well. That's not a flex. Most men wear their feelings on their sleeve and they are very emotional. And he had mentioned, well, I just feel like I'm nervous about our physical intimacy. And I was like, okay, what the hell? Totally appropriate reaction because, again, she's going to mention later on in this article that they have had all the physical intimacy in the world until this moment. And that was the moment he switched up just like that. She continues and says, so instantly I get annoyed because we are still getting to know each other, duh. And I don't feel good. I have an autoimmune disease. I have rheumatoid arthritis. So I tend to get sick and my body hurts and I don't want to be touched. That sounds so reasonable. It's ridiculous. Like, these men really have no chill, absolutely no chill, because this is crazy. And again, she warned him about all of this. She said, and there's been a few times before that he's petting me and I'm overstimulated. I have ADHD. I get overstimulated physically. And I'm like, you can touch me, just don't rub me in that moment. Reading this, I've never related to anything more except for my husband's not a fucking jerk. And he would never make me feel bad about that when I'm having these kinds of moments. So he brings that up and then we start filming right after that. At that point, I go to the balcony to get some air. I get really sensitive about my autoimmune disease. And I'm like, is he not going to be with me if I'm chronically ill? And very fair question, because once again, she did tell him about this and he asked her, how can I support you? How can I show up for you in those moments? And she told him, and now he's doing the opposite. Literally like trying to overstimulate her. He's like questioning her. She says, in the pods, I told them that I'm chronically ill and that's something that I'm sensitive about. And that makes me feel like someone's not going to want to be with me. That was a great conversation. He had asked me, how can I show up for you? How can I show up for you and help you in those moments? And I said, honestly, it's just like being understanding that sometimes I'm not going to be able to perform at 100%. And you just being understanding and helping me in those times. So she asked for a very reasonable amount of support and concessions, especially since it seems like she's made a lot of concessions for him. And again, I want to emphasize that once they got back home, she was back in school, back at work, having an hour-and-a-half commute, and apparently still having intercourse with him every single night, multiple times a day. All of this came out the first time she said no. What was his response to that? He said he was totally okay with it. A lot of the conversations you see outside the pods in the real world are conversations we already kind of had in the pods, but they obviously needed to be brought up again because they weren't matching what he was saying, right? It's not like he was pressuring me to have sex with him, but I was so mad because it's just the least of our worries. I was like, we have sex every day, multiple times. Like, I don't know why we're bringing this up now. And I think that's very valid. Like, kind of crazy that he even brought it up at all, like, that soon. Like, I can sort of understand being like, hey, it's been a week. It had been less than 24 hours. That's how quick this man went from, I want to marry you and you're my soulmate, I desire your love and all the kind of stuff, to, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm having doubts. In response, the interviewer says, it did feel like he was very fixated on sex. And Marissa simply responds, yeah, he was. That's a red flag. That's a red flag. And it's part of that love bombing process. So that once you sort of try to get into like a natural, like, rhythm of things, because obviously, yes, like, people do have what's literally called the honeymoon stage where you're exploring each other's bodies. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine to have a lot of, intimacy up front. A lot of couples have that. But when you are trying to fit 12 hours of work, school, and commuting into a 24-hour day, where you're also supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. That leaves you about 4 hours to get home, change, shower, make dinner, eat, clean up, get yourself ready for the next day, take care of your responsibilities. Mind you, they're also planning a wedding, which there's like a couple scenes where she calls him out on like not helping her at all, even though he was like, oh, I'm gonna be planning this wedding more than you, blah, blah, blah. And she has to call him out 2 separate times that we see on camera. So I don't know how many times it was other than that, for just simply not helping her, not being involved, not being interested. And she's like, I cannot do all this on my own, and I'm not doing this anymore without you. And he's like, oh yeah, okay. So she's supposed to do all of that, then also have intercourse with him several times. And then what else? You know what I mean? What else? When does she get a moment to herself? When does she get to just put her feet up and watch TV? She couldn't have come home and he'd been like, hey, like I knocked a bunch of like wedding planning stuff out. Do you want to just take a look and like approve it, whatever? Like he did none of that. The only time we ever saw them was like him just being all over her, or him pouting about not being able to be all over her. Really upsetting stuff. So then the interviewer asks, similar to this conversation, we were kind of dropped right into your breakup scene. Can you explain what went on before the cameras were rolling? And Marissa explains that 2 days before that, he had talked to a close family friend who used to be close to his ex-wife. And I come home from school one night, mind you, one night, and he is very upset and emotional about his ex-wife. He's crying. And I'm like, what's going on, baby? And he's like, I didn't realize how much I hurt my ex-wife, which is code for I didn't realize how much I miss my ex-wife. I remember looking at him and thinking, this is somehow going to fuck us up. That was probably the only time I thought this might not work out. And then she says, so the next day he's just in a different mood. He's not this chatty, lovey guy. So all of a sudden, he's not in a mood, and that's okay, right? She's just supposed to give him his space. Not allowed to bring up those concerns, but he's allowed to act however he wants. She says, I didn't have class that day, so we were both at home and we aren't meshing. He's not listening to me. He's not talking to me. And I'm starting to feel ignored, and I started to feel like something off. And then he calls a friend. And the way he describes me to his friend, I'm just like, do you even like me? The interviewer is obviously like, well, what did he say? He says his friend's like, oh my God, tell me all about this girl. I'm sitting right next to him. And he's like, oh, she's just so full of energy. Like, he made me sound crazy. I literally got up from the conversation. I don't want to be here if you're going to talk about me like that. So it sounds like he was trying to subtly nag her during this conversation with his friend. Like, he was already trying to plant seeds of doubt in her mind from that moment on. And she says, embarrassingly enough, before we even go to bed that night, because I felt like he was ignoring me, I dressed up in lingerie and I tried to clean the house in my lingerie to see if he noticed. He doesn't notice for over an hour. We go to bed, we don't even kiss goodnight. The next morning I wake up, I go to school, I text him and I say, I love you, I hope everything's okay, we should talk. And he's like, yeah, I've been having some doubts, we should talk. I called him while I was in class. This is around 11 a.m. and he's on the phone just saying, I don't know, I'm starting to feel doubts. And he just starts crying. I leave class. I drive an hour and a half back to DC, and that's where you guys kind of see us talking. He's crying, I'm crying. It just went on like that for the entire day until I want to say like 1 o'clock in the morning. This is all like a quintessential canon event. All of this is getting together with a guy who's so comfortable with his feelings, who's such a feminist. He's so open. He's so loving. You're his soulmate. You're his twin flame. He wants to give you the world and more, until it's time to give you the bare minimum, until it's time to show up in the simplest, most unassuming way. That's when he's no longer willing to give you anything at all. That's when he always starts having doubts, right? It's the man that makes you feel like he's gonna love you no matter what. The man that's like progressive and liberal and whatever is also the man that's gonna turn on a dime and do you so dirty and embarrass you and make you feel crazy. This is the man that you're gonna cry the most over. This is the man that you're gonna be up until 1 o'clock in the morning because he's not willing to say the hard part out loud. He's not willing to say the part where he's like, you really are too much for me. Your autoimmune disease is not something that I want to deal with. If it means that I'm not going to get to have unlimited sex with you multiple times a day. And the moment that this issue comes up, I'm going to completely check out. But he wasn't willing to say all that, was he? He's like, oh, I just don't want to hurt you. I hurt my ex-wife and I don't want to hurt you. They place the onus back on you. The ball is always going to be in your court because this man literally wants to do nothing but exist and then get benefits for that. And if that's not the deal that you're willing to provide, then he does not want to be around for that. She confirms this. They ask her, like, felt like such a gut-wrenching split. The other breakups this season, we sort of saw everything coming and like, things were sort of calm and cool. And Marissa says, I think with the other couples, the difference was none of us saw this breakup coming. It wasn't like me and him were having big fights. The military conversations and the sex and all that, those were discussions you just need to keep having as a couple. And I didn't think they were game changers at the time. I asked him so many times, are you sure? And it wasn't because I wasn't sure. It was because everything was just going so good. So he really gaslit her until the very end. He was not at any point willing to admit that he's a coward and that he's not willing to be there for her in sickness and in health. She confirms it further. She says he would always say 100%, love of my life, soulmate, gonna marry you. I take people at face value, right, because you should. Ramses never led me to believe that I shouldn't believe what is coming out of his mouth. And so when he says break up and I don't want to date you, at this point, the interviewer says, wait, what? And Marissa explains, I offered to not get married. We can stay engaged or we can do everything on our own timeline. We don't have to move in immediately. That was never the plan anyway. We don't have to be engaged to date. So again, she's making all these concessions for him. And it was a hard no for him. He was checked out as soon as she didn't have sex with him that one night. That's it. He says, I'm like, okay, well, let's just not move fast. You stay in DC, I stay in Baltimore, but stay together. And he was like, no. And that's a very hard thing to grasp. How do you supposedly love this person so much and they don't even want to be with you? Then I'm thinking it's me because he's saying it's my energy. So then she's finally catching on, but not quite, unfortunately. And apparently it was when he said no to like even dating, right? She was like, that's what really tore me up. I'm a very smart person. I've spent a lot of years in therapy and I really know what I want. And it really turned me upside down. Like it made me really question everything I've ever believed in. Which makes sense because again, this whole time he's telling her like, no, I'm fully in this. You're my soulmate. I'm going to marry you. And then he's like, no, I don't even want to date you. Like, hard no, I'm hard out, I'm done. So then the interviewer confirms that that's what really happened. Like, you asked to date and he said no. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. He said, no, absolutely not. And they're like, well, did he give an explanation? And she said throughout the whole breakup, which made it worse, he couldn't really give me a reason. To this day, I don't know if he had a really good reason. I think that he had tried to pinpoint certain things, like that I listen to podcasts in the morning and I sing in the shower, that type of stuff. So just things that bring her joy. Totally normal to be upset about that. At the time, he was just like, I don't feel at peace anymore and I feel like our energies are off and I'm gonna hurt you in 5 years, but I love you and want to be with you, but this is moving too fast. And again, this is the same man who was like, no, I absolutely do not want to date you after this. He just lied to her and gaslit her the whole time just to be like, no, I actually want to cut everything off completely. No matter what kind of concessions you want to make, no matter what. And this is why, ladies, you have to stand on business. You really do. You have to know what you want and leave when that's not being met. Because after a certain point, no matter how many concessions you make, that man is just trying to get rid of you. And he wants you to be the one to do it so that he can tell other people you were crazy. So yeah, I'm glad that she made him spell it out so that there was no mistake about who ended this. But I don't think there's any shame as a woman in just being like, you know what? Your words and your actions are not matching, so I'm gonna walk away. Because again, chances are if you don't walk away right then and there, it's just gonna get dragged out into this type of situation where you will be ready to make every last concession in the world and the man will still be like, no. And the interviewer even asks, like, I was surprised by how many times he talked about your energy because up until that point, it felt like the problem was that your priorities and values weren't aligned. Marissa says he will tell you those issues did not play a role in why he didn't want to be together. It was about my energy. So, like, he just picked the easiest, most vague thing that he could go with so that he doesn't seem like the bad guy in the situation. Again, he is gaslighting her and he's lying to her. It was about my energy. In the pods, I told him that with my ADHD, being in an environment where you're filming and there's lights and cameras, it overstimulates me and maybe makes me a little bit more hyper than usual. But I didn't feel like we ever had the time to get there because he was like, no, you're too much. And she says, it's not like I'm at home bouncing off the walls, which I think is very clear. But I do still think that he meant what he said when he said you're too much, because let's get into the next part. The interviewer then asks, you said you felt blindsided in that moment, but do you feel that way as you've watched the season unfold? And Marissa says, I see him being overwhelmed by me in a way that I didn't see in person. So I think I'm less blindsided in that sense. But otherwise, no, because those conversations never felt like the end of us. They just felt like, you have your opinion about this, I have my opinion about this. And she comes back to that first line that I read to you all in the beginning, looking back a year later, where I'm in a different space in my life and headspace. I was trying to make a lot of concessions. I wanted to be with him, and I wanted it to work so bad that I was willing to be like, okay, you're making me feel bad about my career, but we can get past that. And now I'm like, dude, no. And again, this is why playing like cool manic pixie dream girl gets you nowhere. And I'm not saying she was doing that, but I think she wanted it so bad to be just like, oh, this is my opinion, this is your opinion, we're fine. But in reality, he was bringing those things up to nag her and to plant those seeds of doubt. Because again, he hyped her up and he love bombed her to the point where she was trapped. And now he was going to start this whole psyop on her to eventually whittle her down to a size that he was comfortable with. And when she refused to do that, he was like, your energy, it's your energy. Like, okay. So then the interviewer asks about her mom, and they kind of have a conversation where Marissa's like, I told you guys she needs therapy and stuff like that. But she also has a lot of sympathy for her mom because her mom was really young when she had her. That divorce thing was kind of like a pain point for her mom because she clocked him right there. The way he talked about his divorce was very much like, I did this for her, I want her to be happy. And her mom was like, don't explain marriage or divorce to me. And she said, that came across harsh, but she's just trying to say he was talking down to her. And she's saying, I'm done with this conversation because you're trying to make yourself sound like a saint. So she kind of saw through that, and she also saw that I would have to carry him in the relationship. She was like, you're going to have to carry that man emotionally. You're going to have to take care of him. And I saw that. So then the interviewer comes back and says, well, he sort of said that to you during the breakup, that he didn't want to hurt you down the line. And Marissa says, exactly. I recognized that during the breakup. I was like, Ramsey, your ex-wife is getting married this month. She was getting married the same month as us, ironically. And I said, she's getting married. She's moved on. You guys were young. You're not the same person you were when you were 25 when you married her and when you guys got divorced years later. And Marissa goes on to say, I think for him, he knew he couldn't keep up. Yes. And he thought he wasn't good enough. Yes. And the sad part is that a lot of my love for him to this day is unconditional. Him not being with me does not change how I feel about him. Boo. Breaking my heart does not change the love that I have for him. Boo. But for him, our love was very conditional on a lot of things, and he was scared to hurt me. And as I'm editing this, I just want to pop back in here and say that in this moment, he's projecting. He's not actually scared to hurt Marissa. He's scared to hurt himself. He's scared to hurt his own feelings by yet again falling for a woman who is superior to him in every way and makes him feel emasculated because of that. A woman who has so much going on in her life that, keeping his pee-pee happy is not her number one and only priority. A woman who's going to have a high-paying, high-powered job that when they have kids, she's probably going to stay the breadwinner and he's going to have to be the stay-at-home dad. And again, he's only feminist until it's time to actually do any feminist shit, like be a stay-at-home dad or wear a condom or like respect somebody's bodily autonomy. He actually is very against feminist values in practice, just pretending the whole time. But I can tell that this is the same exact kind of man that always love bombs women. But once he gets to this certain point in a relationship with these women, he always feels insecure. And honestly, I think with Marissa, it was the moment that she told him she was into army guys before. He immediately felt insecure because of that, and that's why the first time he nagged her, it was about being in the army and about how he has a moral issue with that. He needed to nag that part of her somehow. And then he just kept going, right? Every part of her that made him feel insecure, he would eventually end up attacking. And in this moment, He was very much projecting because he was scared to hurt his own feelings. Yep, probably because he saw his ex-wife in Marissa and he realized once again he's doing the same thing. He has fallen for a woman that has way too much to offer, that has this amazing energy that he could not keep up with, that he's not good enough for. And once again, he sabotaged it from the inside out. He did it in the worst possible ways, so that it also hurt Marissa as much as possible because he tried to get her to take the blame for it. Oh, it's your energy. Fuck you. Then the interviewer brings up, he did seem to talk down to you throughout the season. And she said, yeah, I agree with that perspective. As I watch it, I'm like, God, Marissa, he's not listening to anything you're saying. He's like, no one put a gun to your head when you joined the military. And I was like, did you not hear anything I just said? She's about to call him the fuck out right here. There's a moral superiority that comes into play in our conversations where it's like, okay, I don't have a degree, I don't have this, I don't have that, but I am more progressive than you. And I care more about the world than you. So therefore, I'm going to say it in small ways to make you feel that way. Exactly. At the time, I didn't really notice it, but I see it more now. And I already have my sister being my progressive awakening. I don't need yours. Exactly. A man is never going to be the reason for your progressive awakening. Men will only use progressive talking points to make you feel bad about yourself and to talk down to you. Don't ever forget that. The interviewer asks once again, do you think that's genuine? Do you really think he was worried about hurting you and that wasn't just what he said to mask other issues? And she gives away her stance right here, unfortunately. She says, yeah, I do. I go back and forth. Honestly, sometimes I'm like, did he know this whole time he wasn't going to marry me? He just did it for the show? Yeah, that's obviously crossed my mind. And she says, I don't know. I think honestly for my own mental health, I've had to believe it had to be somewhat real because I think it would have just hurt too much at the time to think it wasn't. And I'm glad she's being honest about that because it's a very important thing for women to see and deconstruct. While we can't say for sure that he was like doing this just for the show and that he was never going to marry her, I do think that he had very set expectations. He didn't even think they were going to run into these kinds of problems. I really think that he just put on this liberal costume and thought that was going to be enough, just like he probably did with religion before. And I think once again he was confronted with a woman who had more than him to offer. And he got insecure and he sabotaged it from the inside out. There's a lot of men mistake the ADHD, bubbly, manic pixie dream girl personality, which by the way, ADHD women often can't help that. They really do have lots of interest. They really do have this easygoing like disposition. You know, this pendulum also does swing the other way. So you have to know that. And again, I feel like she tried to warn him plenty of times. He was like, no, I'm good. And then once he got around her, he was like, I'm not good. I'm not good enough. And I'm going to make that your problem. And very sadly, you know, when they're talking about, have you seen each other since the breakup? She says, yeah, we saw each other a few times after. I took the breakup really hard, as you can imagine, from the scene of me crying and stuff. It took me probably 6 months to get back on track and to really start to move on. Mind you, this experiment lasts like 3 weeks. Versus the 6 months that is going to take you to get over it. So I saw him a few times when I was in DC. There was one time where we talked one day for like 8.5 hours on the phone, and I thought we were going to get back together after that. Like he had no problem like leading her on, using her as a shoulder to cry on. And at the end of the day, he still rejected her. She said, so like February or March, I did ask him if he wanted to get back together. She says, I'm not really ashamed to say that because I'm someone who's like, if you feel it, you feel it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And he's like, nah. So after that, we just stopped communication. Thank God. For the final question, the interviewer asks, do you have anything you want people to know about you and Ramses? And this answer is, she says, I would say to remember that while what you're seeing is what happened in our conversations, there's a lot more nuance to it. He's not this horrible, evil person who was trying to oppress me. He just really wasn't. Me and him now do communicate and have a fairly decent, I wouldn't call it a friendship, but we can have a conversation. He's not this horrible person that everyone thinks he is. I just think he has a lot of stuff he needs to work on. And until he goes to therapy, he will continue to struggle with who he is as a person. I think she's spot on, but two things can be true at once. He can be struggling with who he is as a person and be a horrible person because of that. Yeah, you can only pour from a full cup. And if his cup is constantly on empty and the only way that he feels like it's full is when you are revolving around him like he is the fucking sun and filling up his cup with the things that make him feel validated, right? Like sex, then yeah, he's gonna be okay. But again, for all of his like feminist and liberal posturing, this man hasn't even been to therapy. So where is all this coming from? Like, how are you so comfortable with your feelings when you're not? Crazy making. Of course she feels crazy. And of course she feels like, you know, back and forth with him. And of course she's not willing to admit that he is a bad person, because then it would mean admitting that she did fall in love with a horrible person. Instead she says, so yeah, people need to be a little nicer. I didn't fall in love with a horrible person. Okay. He seemed pretty horrible to me. As we always say, the bar is in hell. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this was really the only part of that last episode that I cared about and that I care to talk about. I've already said my piece about Tyler and Ashley and Taylor and Garrett. I don't think they should be married either. I think a lot of this show is just people coping with the fact that they're just gonna marry a loser and they're making these concessions. It's honestly such a huge blessing in disguise that Ramses didn't allow Marissa to do that. And I think the only reason he didn't is because he's been through a divorce before and he doesn't want to do that shit again. Yeah, for some reason I'm holding out hope that maybe Taylor and Garrett are no longer married or maybe separated or in the process of a divorce. I don't know. All I can do is hope. It's been a year. That gives him plenty of time to have fucked up. But maybe not. I guess we'll have to wait for the reunion to come out to find out. I'm not going to be posting a Tyler and Ashley or a Taylor and Garrett breakdown video because I've said everything I needed to say about those couples in my Love is Blind mega analysis. So make sure you check that out. And I'll see you guys after the reunion. Godspeed. Mwah.